Daniel 12 has already been fulfilled. That means chapter 11 has also been fulfilled. But we will discuss that chapter at the end. We will cover chapter 12 verse by verse. During that time, Michael will stand up. Daniel 12 verse 1. And during that time, Michael will stand up, the great prince who is standing in behalf of the sons of your people. And there will certainly occur a time of distress such as has not been made to occur since there came to be a nation until that time. And during that time your people will escape, everyone who is found written down in the book. We have seen this powerful angel Michael before in Daniel chapter 10 verses 13 and 21, where he came to the aid of the angel Gabriel, who was being opposed by the demon princes of Persia and later Greece, who were trying to prevent Gabriel from delivering his message to Daniel. Michael is one of the foremost princes who was a prince of you people, that is, a prince of the sons of Israel. It appears Michael had an assignment to look after the nation of Israel. Gabriel came to tell Daniel what would befall his people in the final part of the days. Daniel 10 verse 14. And I have come to cause you to discern what will befall your people in the final part of the days, because it is written yet for the days to come. What final part of the days and what days to come was Gabriel talking of? None other than the then future destruction of the temple and the city of Jerusalem and the end of the Mosaic covenant. That tribulation is described by Daniel in chapter 9 verses 26 and 27. And after the 62 weeks, Messiah will be cut off with nothing for himself. And the city and the holy place, the people of a leader that is coming, will bring to their ruin. And the end of it will be by the flood. And until the end, there will be war. What is decided upon is desolations. And he must keep the covenant in force for the many for 1 week. And at the half of the week, he will cause sacrifice and gift offering to cease. And upon the wing of disgusting things, there will be the one causing desolation. And until an extermination, the very thing decided upon will go pouring out, also upon the one lying desolate. In his prophecy regarding the destruction of the temple and the conclusion of the system of things, Jesus spoke of the disgusting thing that causes desolation. Matthew 24 verse 15, as spoken by Daniel the prophet in Daniel 9 as quoted above. This is the Roman army who planted the pagan ensigns of their gods in their holy temple. Jesus added that the tribulation that occurs will not occur again. Matthew 24 verse 21. For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the world's beginning until now, no, nor will occur again. These are similar words written by Daniel in chapter 12 verse 1 as quoted earlier. Jesus also said that the generation who was listening to his words back then in the first century would be the one that would not pass away until all things occur. Luke 21 verse 32. Truly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away until all things occur. That means there will be no greater future fulfillment. To argue that there will be is to contradict what Jesus stated in Matthew 24:21, that the tribulation will not occur again. Moreover, their generation who listened to his words in the first century would not be alive to see any future fulfillment. You could argue that they could be resurrected and see a future fulfillment, but that would violate what Jesus stated. He said that generation would not pass away. Irrefutable proof that Jesus' prophecy of Luke 21:32 was for his first century audience only is found in Matthew chapter 12 verses 38 to 40. Then, as an answer to him, some of the scribes and Pharisees said, "Teacher, we want to see a sign from you." In reply, he said to them, "A wicked and adulterous generation keeps on seeking for a sign, but no sign will be given it except the sign of Jonah the prophet. For just as Jonah was in the belly of the huge fish 3 days and 3 nights, so the Son of Man will be in the heart of the earth 3 days and 3 nights." So that wicked generation would only be given the sign of Jonah, that Jesus would be dead for 3 days, but would be resurrected afterwards. The generation who witnessed that sign died more than 2,000 years ago. Many of those asleep in the ground of dust will wake up. Daniel 12:2. And there will be many of those asleep in the ground of dust who will wake up. These to indefinitely lasting life, and those to reproaches and to indefinitely lasting abhorrence. This verse has convinced many that Daniel 12 has a future fulfillment. Verse 2 is certainly speaking about the future resurrection that will occur, known as Judgment Day or the 1,000-year reign of Christ. Martha, in replying to Jesus regarding her dead brother, called that time period as the resurrection. But does that mean the whole of Daniel chapter 12 occurs in the future? All the angel was saying in Daniel 12:2 was that there would be those during the resurrection or judgment day who would be righteous and have everlasting life, and those, the unrighteous, who would not change and so would be judged abhorrently. Did not Paul say that there would be a resurrection of the righteous and unrighteous? Acts 24:15. And I have hope toward God, which hope these men themselves also entertain, that there is going to be a resurrection of both the righteous and the unrighteous. It may seem odd that the angel speaks about events in the first century in verse 1, then jumps to the resurrection thousands of years in the future, but this is deliberate. God lays traps or red herrings so that the wicked will not understand. If one lets the Bible interpret itself, then any oddity or seeming contradiction is resolved. In Daniel 12 itself, this is explained by the angel. Daniel 12:10. Many will cleanse themselves and whiten themselves and will be refined, and the wicked ones will certainly act wickedly, and no wicked ones at all will understand, but the ones having insight will understand. So, the angel in Daniel 12:2 is merely saying that good and wicked people who have died during the tribulation on the Jewish system of things in the first century will be resurrected. The ones having insight will shine like the brightness of their expanse. Daniel 12:3. And the ones having insight will shine like the brightness of their expanse, and those who are bringing the many to righteousness like the stars to time indefinite, even forever. The ones having insight, the first century Christians, especially the apostles, preached the good news to the Israelites in Jerusalem, and where the Jews had been scattered around the world the Hebrew people of the nations, otherwise known as the Gentiles. They explained what commandments of the law were still binding on the Hebrews whilst they lived outside of Israel and the temple, and warned of the coming destruction of Jerusalem, the temple and the Jewish system of things. Their teachings are immortalized in the Christian Greek scriptures. Seal up the book until the time of the end. Daniel 12:4. And as for you, O Daniel, make secret the words and seal up the book until the time of the end. Many will rove about, and their true knowledge will become abundant. The book of Daniel was written hundreds of years before the first century. It covered and prophesied events concerning 4 kingdoms: Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, and Rome. Those kingdoms had a hold on God's people, the Hebrew Israelites. Their prophecies in the book was not understood until they occurred or afterwards. It contained prophecies regarding the Messiah and the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. The apostles led the way in making knowledge of their prophecies abundant and unsealing the meaning of their book at the time of the end of the Jewish system of things through their preaching and the writings of the Christian Greek scriptures. How long will it be to the end of the wonderful things? Daniel 12:5 and 6. And I saw, Daniel, and look, there were 2 others standing, one on the bank here of the stream, and the other on the bank there of the stream. Then one said to the man clothed with the linen, who was up above the waters of the stream, how long will it be to the end of the wonderful things? Daniel sees 3 powerful holy angels at the stream, one each on either side of the stream, and another further up, dressed in linen. This 3rd angel may have been of higher rank, as he had more information than the other 2. One of the 2 asked him, how long would it be to the end of the wonderful things? That is, the things that was prophesied to occur upon Daniel's people, the Israelites. It will be for an appointed times and a half. Daniel 12:7. And I began to hear the man clothed with the linen, who was up above the waters of the stream, as he proceeded to raise his right hand and his left hand to the heavens, and to swear by the one who is alive for time indefinite. It will be for an appointed times and a half, and as soon as there will have been a finishing of the dashing of the power of the holy people to pieces, all these things will come to their finish. The angel clothed in linen said the wonderful things culminating in the dashing of the power of the holy people to pieces would last an appointed times and half a time, so that is 1 plus 2 times and 1/2, a total of 3.5 years. This is similar to the time period used in Revelation, where a heavenly pregnant woman is described as about to give birth, where a dragon waited to devour her child, but she fled to the wilderness, where she was fed for 1,260 days, or times and half a time, or 3.5 years. The 3.5 year period of Daniel 12:7 evidently began from when the Romans suddenly withdrew from Jerusalem in 66 CE, and the apostles and other Christians fled Jerusalem in obedience to Christ's word. preached the good news and prophesied about their destruction of Jerusalem and the end of the Jewish system of things. They unsealed the meaning of the book of Daniel as described in Daniel 12:3 earlier in this essay. The dashing of the power of the holy people came to its end in their terrible wars and great tribulation upon Jerusalem as described by their historian Josephus. See the video, No Future Fulfillment of the Great Tribulation of the Gospels. Many will cleanse themselves and whiten themselves. Daniel 12:8-10. Now as for me, I heard, but I could not understand. So that I said, O my Lord, what will be the final part of these things? And he went on to say, Go, Daniel, because the words are made secret and sealed up until the time of the end. Many will cleanse themselves and whiten themselves and will be refined, and the wicked ones will certainly act wickedly, and no wicked ones at all will understand, but the ones having insight will understand. Yes, the words were sealed up until the last days of the Jewish system of things. The apostles led the way in unsealing the meaning of Daniel, preaching the good news of their kingdom, and persuading many Israelites to cleanse themselves and whiten themselves by repenting and becoming disciples of Christ. No wicked ones understood the book of Daniel, but the apostles did, and some of its meaning are contained in the books written by the apostles as part of their Christian Greek scriptures. And there has been a placing of the disgusting thing that is causing desolation. Daniel 12:11-13. And from the time that the constant feature has been removed and there has been a placing of the disgusting thing that is causing desolation, there will be 1,290 days. Happy is the one who is keeping in expectation and who arrives at the 1,335 days. And as for you yourself, go toward the end, and you will rest, but you will stand up for your lot at the end of the days. The disgusting thing, the Roman army, when they gained control of the temple, removed the constant feature or daily sacrifices of the temple that God commanded to Moses to be carried out perpetually. The Romans placed their own disgusting idols in the holy temple. Historian Flavius Josephus describes the occasion in an extract from Book 6, Chapter 6, Section 1, partial. And now the Romans, upon the flight of their seditious into the city, and upon the burning of the holy house itself, and of all the buildings lying round about it, brought their ensigns to the temple, and set them over against its eastern gate, and there did they offer sacrifices to them, and there did they make Titus Imperator with the greatest acclamations of joy. And now all the soldiers had such vast quantities of the spoils which they had gotten by plunder, that in Syria a pound weight of gold was sold for half its former value. The angel said that from the time that the constant feature had been removed, there would be 1,290 days. He added that happy was the one who kept in expectation and who arrived at the 1,335 days. These lengths of time are a little over 3.5 years. We said earlier in the section of the essay entitled, It will be for an appointed time, appointed times and a half, that The 3.5-year period began after the Romans withdrew from sieging Jerusalem until a little time after their destruction and desolation of the city. The apostles and faithful Hebrew Christians were happy and kept in expectation when they unsealed the meaning of the book of Daniel, warned of the coming destruction of the Jewish system of things, preached the good news, and made disciples of Hebrew descendants of the Israelites scattered about. Daniel 12:13. And as for you yourself, go toward the end, and you will rest, but you will stand up for your lot at the end of the days. The angel tells Daniel to go toward the end, or in other words, continue until he passes away. Daniel will rest, says the angel, but you will stand up for your lot at the end of their days. The angel mentions the resurrection again, as he did in verse 2 of chapter 12, that Daniel will be resurrected or stand up at the end of the days or during Judgment Day. What about Daniel chapter 11? That chapter features the pushing between the king of the north and the king of the south that many believe is still playing out today and into the future. As the author of this essay believes the last chapter of Daniel has already been fulfilled in the 1st century, so too has chapter 11. Many commentators and historians are in agreement that the fulfillment of Daniel 11 verses 2 to 45 are as follows. 11:2 Medo-Persian kings, 11:3 Alexander the Great, 11 verses 4 to 20 Seleucid and Ptolemaic kings, 11 verses 21 to 45 Antiochus IV Epiphanes. In addition, many Christians believe there is a break in the prophecy at 11 verses 36 to 40 that speak about the Antichrist or the man of lawlessness. The author of this essay does not believe this, but have found a convincing argument that Daniel 11 verses 36 to 45 was in fact fulfilled by Herod the Great. The evidence can be found in the following link. Please scroll down to verse 36 and read from that point. This site is unsecured. Please copy and paste their content onto Word and read from there. Otherwise, please find here a copy of a verse-by-verse interpretation of Daniel 11, 36 to 45 by the owner of the aforementioned website, Dale DePriest, who based his interpretations on the writings of Philip Morrow, proving that these so-called future end-time verses were fulfilled by Herod the Great in the 1st century. Daniel 11:36. And the king will actually do according to his own will, and he will exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and against the God of gods he will speak marvelous things, and he will certainly prove successful until their denunciation will have come to a finish, because the thing decided upon must be done. Dale DePriest, Herod the King. That remarkable character who was a usurper upon the throne of David when Christ, the true king, was born, the proof which enables us to identify the king of Daniel 11:36 to 39 with Herod the Great and his dynasty is so convincing that we feel warranted in saying that the prophecy could not possibly mean anyone else. It would be strange indeed if, in an outline which gives prominence to Xerxes, Alexander, the Seleucids, the Ptolemies, Antiochus Epiphanes, and the Maccabees, there were no mention of that remarkable personage who exerted upon Jewish affairs and destinies an influence greater than they all, and who sat upon the throne of Israel when Christ was born. The words "the king" should suffice in the light of the context without further description to identify Herod to those who thoughtfully read their Bibles, for Herod alone is called by that title in the Gospels, and he alone had the rank and authority of king in Israel in the days after their captivity, the latter days. The text does not speak of a king, but of their king, the emphatic Hebrew article being used. This is in marked contrast with the terms of verse 40, where the original speaks of a king of the north and a king of the south. A glance at the context is enough to show that the king of verse 36 cannot mean either of the kings of verse 27. Moreover, these are never spoken of as the king, but always both before and after verse 36 as the king of the north or the king of the south, as the case may be. Nor does the scripture speak of any king who is to arise at the time of the end of this present age and who answers at all to their description of the prophecy. The man of sin described in 2 Thessalonians 2 verses 3 to 10 is supposed by some to be the king of Daniel 11:36, but he is not called a king nor described as having kingly rank, but rather as one claiming divine worship in the temple of God and backing up his pretensions by means of miracles and lying wonders. The king of Daniel 11:36 is a very different personage and achieves his ends in a very different way, as will be clearly seen by all who diligently compare the two passages. What has caused able commentators to go astray at this point, and in some instances to seek far afield for their interpretation of this passage, is the fact that they were unable to find anyone among the successors of Antiochus who answers at all to their description of the king. But they have overlooked two things which, had they heeded them, would have kept them from being so misled. Those things are, first, that the prophecy has not for its subject the kingdoms of Syria or Egypt, but the people of Israel, and hence their expression "the king" without other qualification would mean one who was king over Daniel's people. And second, that the verses immediately preceding verses 31 to 35 relate wholly to the affairs of the Jews under the Asmonean princes, and hence the terms of the prophecy itself lead us to look at this point for the beginning of a new order of things in Israel. And that is just what history certifies to us. For precisely at this juncture of affairs, the Asmonean dynasty was brought to an end by violence and bloodshed, and it was replaced by that of a king who answers perfectly to the description of the last part of the prophecy. Moreover, and to this we would specially invite attention, it is said of this king that he shall prosper until the indignation be accomplished, or until wrath be completed, in fulfillment of which is the fact that the dynasty of Herod retained, through all the political upheavals of the times, its favor with Rome, and flourished in authority in Palestine until the destruction of Jerusalem, which is the wrath or indignation or tribulation to which these prophecies of Daniel so frequently refer as the end of Jewish nationality, for it was Herod the king who sought to compass the death of Christ soon after his birth, and whose successors of his own family put to death John the Baptist. This was done by Herod Antipas, and James the brother of John, by Herod Agrippa I, who also imprisoned Peter, intending to deliver him to the Jews, and finally sent Paul in chains to Rome, which was done by Herod Agrippa II, the last of their dynasty, the man who is best known to the world as he who was almost persuaded according to his will. The first thing said of this king is that he should do according to his will. This is usually taken to mean that he would be of an exceptionally self-willed disposition, one of the sort who act without restraint and without regard to the rights or the feelings of others. This may indeed be in part the meaning of the words, but much more than this is implied. Self-willed people are so very numerous that if that were all that were meant, the words could not serve for purposes of identification. But not many are so placed and have such power in their hands that they are able to do, that is, to achieve or accomplish what they will or plan to do, and this is what is meant. For the expression is used in this same prophecy of two other notable personages. The first of these is Alexander the Great, of whom it is said that he shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. The other has been identified as Antiochus the Great. Of him also it is said, he shall do according to his own will. And history shows that this monarch too was very successful during the first part of his reign in carrying out his various designs. This is what distinguished Herod the Great in a remarkable degree, for history records nothing of this nature. More notable than Herod's success in rising up from a lowly origin to the rank and authority of king, in securing for himself despotic power and retaining it through all the political changes of the times, and in the way he used that power for the accomplishment of all his designs, however stupendous in magnitude as the rebuilding of the temple, or atrocious in character as condemning to death his own wife and children. For Herod contrived to secure the favor and confidence first of Julius Caesar, then of Mark Antony, and then of Octavius Caesar, though he had assisted Antony and Cleopatra against him. All things considered, there is nothing more wonderful in the career of Herod than his extraordinary success in doing according to his will. But, taking the expression in the other sense, we may say that it would be difficult to find in history one who so ruthlessly executed the designs of his own tyrannical and cruel heart, even upon those of his own flesh and blood, as Herod the king. His murder of his best-loved wife, the beautiful Marian, who was a princess of the Asmonean family, is, in its special circumstances, without parallel in history. He put to death also 3 of his own sons, 2 of them by this favorite wife, because he suspected them of aspiring to his throne, and similar deeds of wilfulness characterized his entire reign. Josephus gives many instances of this, exalting and magnifying himself. Further, it is said of this king that he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods. These words are descriptive of Herod. The words above every god may be taken to mean every ruler and authority in Israel, just as God of gods means the supreme authority above all authorities. Herod did successfully aspire to the lordship over every authority in the land, whether priests or rulers. He assumed to appoint whom he would to the office of high priest. He put his own brother-in-law, Aristobulus, Marion's brother, in that office, and shortly after had him murdered. Herod also uttered great things against the God of gods. This, we believe, refers specially, though not exclusively, to his decree for the slaughter of the babes of Bethlehem, the express purpose of which was to get rid of Emmanuel, God come in the flesh, to be the ruler of his people and to be prince of the kings of the earth. Herod's way of making himself secure on the throne was to put to death every suspected rival. For Herod, in common with the Jewish teachers in his day, and with some teachers in our own day who ought to know better, mistakenly supposed that the Christ of God was coming at that time to occupy the earthly throne upon which Herod was then seated. We shall have occasion to refer again to this prominent act in the career of Herod. Daniel 11:37. And to the God of his fathers he will give no consideration, and to their desire of women and to every other god he will give no consideration, but over everyone he will magnify himself. Del de Priest. Because of their reference to their gods or God of his fathers, some have concluded that this ruler will be a Jew, since the Old Testament frequently uses the phrase the God of your fathers to refer to the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. For example, Exodus 3:15. Herod the Great was born about the year 73 BC, ruled from 37 to 4 BC, and was a son of the Antipater from Edom. Thus he was not a full-blooded Jew, but met the requirement of this verse. The first clause manifestly could not apply to any heathen king like Antiochus, for whether or not a heathen king should change his national gods is a matter of no importance whatever, but with a king of Israel it is a matter of supreme importance. Now Herod, though supposedly of Idumean, i.e. Edomite origin, was virtually a Jew, for all the remaining Idumeans who had come into Judea several centuries previous had been amalgamated with the Jews. In addressing the people, Herod habitually used the expression our fathers. So fully was Herod regarded as a Jew that the Herodians even held him to be their Messiah. Therefore, in introducing the worship of Caesar, Herod conspicuously failed to regard the God of his fathers. Moreover, in this connection, it should not be forgotten that Esau was Jacob's twin brother, and hence that the God of the fathers of the Edomites was the same as the God of the fathers of the Jews. The desire of women. The words, nor the desire of woman, are very significant. There can scarcely be any doubt that they refer to Christ, and that Daniel would so understand them. For of course, the woman must be understood to be women of Israel, and the ardent desire of every one of them was that she might be the mother of Christ. The same word is found in Haggai 2:7. And the desire of all nations shall come. Evidently, then, it is Christ who is referred to as the desire of woman. And if so, then we have a striking fulfillment of these words in Herod's attempt to murder the infant Messiah. For the record given in Matthew 2, verses 1 to 16, makes it quite clear that Herod's deliberate purpose was to put to death the promised Messiah of Israel. It was for the accomplishment of that purpose that he inquired of the chief priests and scribes as to where Christ should be born. The slaughter of the babes of Bethlehem was an act of atrocity almost without parallel in history. It was, moreover, an event that had been foretold by Jeremiah in the words, "A voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping, Rachel weeping for her children," etc. Jeremiah 31:15, quoted in Matthew 2:17-18. Each one of those murdered infants was the desire of his own mother, and thus Herod fulfilled Daniel 11:37 in another sense. Daniel 11:38. But to the God of fortresses, in his position he will give glory, and to a God that his fathers did not know, he will give glory by means of gold, and by means of silver, and by means of precious stone, and by means of desirable things. Del Debris, the God of forces. Verse 38. And in his estate, or for his establishment, shall he honor the God of forces, or God of fortresses, ASV, and or even a God whom his fathers knew not, shall be honored with gold and silver, and precious or costly stones, and with pleasant or valuable things. Herod's career affords a most striking fulfillment of this verse. The expression God of forces or fortresses is so unusual that it furnishes a most satisfactory means of identification, for it applies to the Caesars as to none others in history, seeing that the Roman emperors claimed for themselves divine honors, and that it was by forces or fortifications that they extended and maintained their power and enforced the worship they demanded. This honor Herod paid to them, and after the most extravagant fashion, and he did it, of course, in order to make himself secure, that is to say, for his own establishment, as the text of verse 38 may be rendered. This honor paid by Herod first to Julius Caesar, then to Antony, and then to Antony's conqueror Augustus, was one of the most conspicuous features of Herod's policy. Josephus records how he sent delegations to Rome, and also to Antony and Cleopatra in Egypt, being the most costly presents. Also how he converted the ancient Stratos Tower into a magnificent seaport and named it Caesarea in honor of Caesar, and how later he rebuilt Samaria and renamed it Sebastos, being the equivalent of Augustus. He built many other fortified cities and named them in honor of Caesar. Daniel 11:39. And he will act effectively against the most fortified strongholds, along with a foreign god. Whoever has given him recognition, he will make abound with glory, and he will actually make them rule among many, and the ground he will apportion out for a price. They'll decrease. Here we have a reference to one of the most prominent acts of Herod's long reign, namely his rebuilding of the temple and his making the temple area a stronghold for Caesar. He made the temple the most famous building in the world for its dimensions, its magnificence, and particularly for the size of the stones whereof it was built, to which their disciples specially directed the Lord's attention, and which Josephus says were 25 cubits long, 12 broad, and 8 thick. But in rebuilding it, Herod took care to convert it into a fortress for his own purposes, this being the most stronghold of the land. As a part of this plan, he constructed on the north side of the temple and overlooking it a strong citadel, which he named the Tower of Antonia, after Mark Antony. Josephus says, "But for the tower itself, when Herod the king of the Jews had fortified it more firmly than before, in order to secure and guard the temple, he gratified Antonius, who was his friend and the Roman ruler, by calling it the Tower of Antonia." Further, this historian says that the fortified places were two, the one belonging to the city itself, the other belonging to the temple, and those that could get them into their hands had the whole nation under their power, for without the command of them it was not possible to offer their sacrifices. It was from the stairs leading to this famous tower, up which the Apostle Paul was being taken by the soldiers to save him from the violence of the people, that he stilled them by a gesture of his hand and gained their attention by addressing them in the Hebrew tongue. Again, Josephus says of Herod that when Caesar had further bestowed upon him another additional country, he built there also a temple of white marble, hard by the fountains of Jordan. And also, to say all at once, there was not any place in his kingdom fit for the purpose that was permitted to be without somewhat that was for Caesar's honor. And when he had filled his own country with temples, he poured out like plentiful marks of his esteem into his province, and built many cities which he called Caesareas. In connection with the prediction of what this king would do in the chief strongholds with a strange god, mention should be made of the many images, statues of Caesar, which Herod set up to be worshipped in various fortified places. He even went so far in his sacrilege as to place a huge golden eagle, the adored emblem of Imperial Rome, at the very gate of the temple, thus giving rise to a tumult and insurrection among the people. In this way did he, in his estate office, honor the god of forces, Caesar, whose statues he everywhere introduced as objects of worship. He fulfilled with literal exactness the words, "Thus shall he do in the most strongholds," which expression would apply to the citadel of the temple, where he erected the Tower of Antonia, with a strange God whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory. The last clause finds a striking fulfillment in Herod's extravagant pains to glorify Caesar, which, as we have shown, went beyond all bounds. The words dividing the land for gain or parceling it out for hire were fulfilled in the practice adopted by Herod of parceling out among persons favourable to himself the land adjacent to places which it was important for him to control in case of emergency. Josephus speaks of this. We thus find that every item foretold of the king was completely fulfilled in the career of Herod, and that the record of this fulfillment has come down to us in an authentic contemporary history, which is on all hands acknowledged to be trustworthy in an unusually high degree. Daniel 11:40. And in the time of the end, the king of the south will engage with him in a pushing, and against him the king of the north will storm with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships, and he will certainly enter into the lands and flood over and pass through. Del the priest. The time of the end. In order to avoid confusion, it is needful to observe that the time of the end may mean one period in one place and a very different period in another. The meaning is controlled and is also revealed by the context, but this is quite frequently overlooked, and we have observed that even careful writers on prophecy have a disposition to take the words "the time of the end" as meaning the end of the gospel dispensation, even when the passage in which they occur does not relate to their present dispensation at all. Particularly should it be noted that in the book of Daniel there are two distinct sets of prophecies. The first set, found in chapters 2, 7 and 8, relate to the great Gentile world powers, and the prophecies of chapters 2 and 7 carry us on to the end of the times of the Gentiles. Chapter 8 gives details of the Greek Empire, thus filling in the outline given in the vision of chapter 7. But the second series, chapters 9 to 12 inclusive, have to do with the history of Daniel's own people and his holy city. Hence, the expression "time of the end," where it occurs in these later prophecies, means the last stage of the national existence of Daniel's people, that is to say, the era of the Herods. The period of Jewish history occupied by Herod and his dynasty was therefore the time of the end, in the sense required by the context. So we have a strong confirmation of the view we have been presenting in the fact that just at this point in the prophecy there is given us an outline of those great events which occurred during the reign of Herod, whereby political supremacy in the world was given to the Caesars, and all was made ready for the coming of their Redeemer. This outline is found in Daniel 11:40-43, and brings us to the subjugation of Egypt, the last of the great independent monarchies to fall under the spreading power of Rome, with the Libyans and the Ethiopians. The records of history correspond so exactly to the predictions of this prophecy, as we shall presently point out, that there can be no question at all as to its fulfillment. In reading this chapter, it is to be remembered that the prophecy is not primarily concerned with Syria, Egypt, Rome, or any other alien power, but that it refers to them only insofar as they come in contact with and affect the destinies of the Jews. Caesar Augustus. Hence, these verses, Daniel 11:40-43, have a parenthetical character. As to the manner in which that war began, we have a very clear account in Plutarch's Life of Mark Antony, by which it appears that the fulfillment of the prophecy was marvellously exact, not only as regards the manner in which the war began, but also in respect to the sides on which the different parties were at first engaged in it, in regard also to the outcome, to the peculiar arms, chariots and horsemen and many ships, by means of which the victories of Augustus were achieved, and finally in regard also to the rapidity of his conquest, which was effected within the space of a single year. Plutarch's description of the Actian War. The first move in the Actian War was made by Antony at the urgency of Cleopatra, in which he was assisted by Herod. Says Plutarch, Antony, being informed of these things, that is, of certain disputes between Augustus and others in the Senate at Rome, immediately sent Candidus to the seacoast with 16 legions. In the meantime, he went to Ephesus, attended by Cleopatra. There he assembled his fleet, which consisted of 800 ships of burden, whereof Cleopatra furnished 200 besides 20,000 talents, and provisions for the army. Antony advanced to Athens with constantly increasing forces, Augustus being wholly unprepared to meet him. For says the historian, when Caesar was informed of the celerity and magnificence of Antony's preparations, he was afraid of being forced into war that summer. This would have been most inconvenient for him, for he was in want of almost everything. The auxiliary kings who fought under his Antony's banner were Bocchus of Africa, etc., a list being given. Those who did not attend in person but sent supplies were Polemo of Pontus, Marcus of Arabia, Herod of Judea, and Amytas of Lycaonia and Galatia. Thus, a king of the south was the first to make a push in this war, and he pushed with Herod. As showing the accuracy of the prophecy, it should be noted that, as Plutarch records, the Senate of Rome declared war with Cleopatra alone, ignoring Antony, so that it was strictly between a king of the north and a king of the south. Mr. Farquharson points out that the predictions of the prophet were strictly fulfilled also in respect to the character of the forces engaged in the war. For, notwithstanding that each side assembled large numbers of infantry, and notwithstanding that such are the arms usually relied upon to decide the war, yet in this case the infantry were not engaged at all, the issue being decided as the prophecy indicates, by chariots and horsemen and many ships. A strange feature of the affair is that, although Antony's footmen outnumbered those of Augustus, and although his generals urged him to bring the matter to an issue in a land battle, nevertheless, to quote again from Plutarch, "Shattered slave was he to the will of a woman that, to gratify her, though much superior on land, he put his whole confidence in the navy, notwithstanding that the ships had not half their complement of men." This brought on the great naval fight of Actium, which ended in a complete victory for Augustus, and thus did a king of the north come upon a king of the south, with the effect of a whirlwind with many ships. A more literal and exact fulfillment of prophecy could not be found. But that is not all, for Plutarch recalls that after their disaster at Actium, Antony's infantry deserted him, so that the infantry were not engaged during the entire war. But, says Farquharson, when Antony arrived in Egypt and endeavored to defend it, to fulfill the prediction of the prophet that the king of the north would come with chariots and horsemen, as well as with many ships, there were actions with cavalry. For Plutarch says, when Caesar arrived, he encamped near the Hippodrome at Alexandria, whereupon Antony made a brisk sally, routed the cavalry, drove them back into their trenches, and returned to the city with the complacency of a conqueror. It was the conduct of their fleets and cavalry that sealed the fate of Antony and Cleopatra, and left them without resource in their last retreat. Daniel 11:41. He will also actually enter into the land of their decoration, and there will be many lands that will be made to stumble, but these are the ones that will escape out of his hand: Edom and Moab, and the main part of the sons of Ammon. Del Debris, their countries and their glorious land. The course pursued by Augustus after his triumph over Antony and Cleopatra follows most literally the predictions of their prophecy, for he entered into their countries and overflowed and passed over them, possessing himself of regions of Africa, Upper Cilicia, Paphlagonia, Thrace, Pontus, Galatia, and other provinces, from Illyria to Armenia. Moreover, he entered also into their glorious land, that is to say, the land of Judea, which has already been designated the glorious land. For Augustus chose to invade Egypt by way of Palestine, at which time Herod, who had already, with great prudence and foresight, made his submission to Augustus, and with such skillful diplomacy that it was accepted, rendered him much assistance. Josephus says, Caesar went for Egypt through Syria when Herod received him with royal and rich entertainments. And then did he first of all ride along with Caesar, as he was reviewing his army about Ptolemais, and feasted him with all his friends, and then distributed among the rest of his army what was necessary to feast then withal. Edom, Moab, and Ammon. The reference in verse 41 to the countries of Edom, Moab, and Ammon should be enough, without anything further, to show that we must seek the fulfillment of this part of the prophecy in Bible times. Those names had a geographical significance to Daniel and to others of his day, who would understand by them the mingled peoples of their lands adjacent to Judea on the east and south. Now it is recorded in history that those countries did escape in a remarkable manner out of the hand of Augustus. Augustus sent an expedition into the countries referred to under Aelius Gallus, in which he was joined by 500 of Herod's guards. Dean Bredel, the well-known commentator, refers to this expedition and its failure, citing Pliny, Strabo, and Dio Cassius. The Universal History, in a note added to their account of their expedition, says, the bad success that attended Aelius in this expedition deterred both him and others from any further attempts on that country. Daniel 11, 42. And he will keep thrusting out his hand against the lands, and as regards the land of Egypt, she will not prove to be an escapee. They'll decrease. This verse indicates the strong contrast with the countries that did escape, as outlined in the previous verse. Daniel 11:43. And he will actually rule over the hidden treasures of the gold and the silver, and over all the desirable things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians will be at his steps. They'll decrease. The treasures of Egypt. Their prophecy makes special reference to the vast treasures of Egypt. Here again are words which make it perfectly clear that the fulfillment of this prophecy must be sought in the days of Egypt's greatness and wealth, and is not to be found in the squalid and poverty-stricken Egypt of later times, which, according to the sure word of prophecy, was to become the basis of the kingdoms, and not to exalt itself any more. But in the days of Herod and Mark Antony, the treasures of Egypt were of fabulous value, and here again history furnishes us with such a marvelous fulfillment of this item of the prophecy that we can but think the records have been providentially cared for. Speaking of Cleopatra's vast and famous treasures of gold, silver and precious stones, and other rare and costly objects, Falkenhausen says that the history of the fate of her treasures is very singular and is worthy of a more detailed reference to it. So it shows how this great treasure had been accumulated during the centuries of the Macedonian rulers of Egypt, the Ptolemies, being drawn from the great grain trade of the country and from the very lucrative commerce of Alexandria, through which passed the gems, pearls, spices, and other rich produce and merchandise of India, which from earliest ages have been in high request in the western part of the world. Continuing his account, Falkenhausen says, Augustus Caesar was very desirous of securing the treasures of the sovereign of this wealthy city, but there was, on 2 occasions, the utmost hazard that they should elude his grasp. For after Cleopatra fled from the battle of Actium, Plutarch says, she formed the design of drawing her galleys over the isthmus into the Red Sea, and purposed, with all her wealth and forces, to seek some remote country. That design was abandoned, but when Caesar afterwards, approaching from Judea, took Pelusium and entered Egypt, the same author says, Cleopatra had erected near the temple of Isis some monuments of extraordinary size and magnificence. To these she removed her treasure, her gold, silver, emeralds, pearls, ebony, ivory, and cinnamon. Caesar was under some apprehensions about this immense wealth, lest, upon some sudden emergency, she should set fire to the whole. For this reason he was continually sending messages to her with assurances of generous and honorable treatment, while in the meantime he hastened to the city with his army. Her person and the treasures in the monument were afterwards secured by a stratagem, as related by Plutarch, and thus a king of the north had power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. The Libyans and Ethiopians. Their prophecy also says concerning this victorious king, and the Libyans and Ethiopians shall be at his steps. Commenting on these words, Falkenhausen says, the conquest of Egypt and maritime Libya laid inner Libya and Ethiopia open to their steppes, that is, as we may interpret the term, to the inroads of Augustus Caesar and his officers, of which advantage was soon after taken by them. And this author proceeds to show the conquest of the countries named in the prophecy by Cornelius Balbus, which was considered so great an achievement that Balbus, though not a native Roman, was, contrary to all precedent, allowed a triumph. Thus, while Augustus did not himself subdue those countries, they were at his steps, as the prophecy says, at the time he left Africa and returned to Rome. Thus, ancient history, which has been preserved to our day, shows to us a series of events of the highest importance in shaping the course of human affairs, which events correspond with marvelous exactitude and in just the right sequence to the several details of their prophecy, the entire series having taken place at precisely the era it should look for them to occur if we take the prophecy to be what it appears to be, namely a continuous prophetic narrative. If then this be not a fulfillment, there is nothing that can be with certainty recognized as a fulfillment of inspired prophecy. Daniel 11:44. But there will be reports that will disturb him out of the sunrising and out of the north, and he will certainly go forth in a great range in order to annihilate and to devote many to destruction. Tell the priest. Tidings from east and north. It is not at first glance apparent who is the antecedent of the pronoun he in these verses, but upon close attention to the text, it will be seen that we have here a return to the main subject of this part of the prophecy, the king of verse 36, the course of the prophecy having been diverted in verses 40 to 43 to the subject of the conquest of Augustus Caesar. Very often, in reading the Hebrew prophets, we have to look a considerable distance backwards to find the antecedent of a pronoun. As an instance of this, Falkenhausen cites Bishop Horsley as saying, in commenting upon Isaiah 18, to those to whom the prophetic style in the original is not familiar, but to those only, I think, it will appear strange that a pronoun should refer to an antecedent at so great a distance. And Falkenhausen adds, and the correctness of this view of the whole passage is confirmed by the literal manner in which the predictions in this 44th verse and in the remaining verse of the chapter were fulfilled by Herod. Indeed, we do not see how any fulfillment could be more complete and literal than that which is given us in Matthew's Gospel of the words, but tidings out of the east shall trouble him. For it is written that when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and are come to worship him. When Herod heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. So here we have the exact thing prophesied, namely, tidings out of the east, which troubled him. Nothing was so well calculated to trouble Herod as reports that someone was aspiring to his throne. In this case, it is among the most familiar of all facts that Herod, being set at naught by the wise men from whom he sought to learn the identity of their newborn babe, was exceeding wroth, and sent forth and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem, and in all the coasts thereof, from 2 years old and under. Thus we have almost verbal agreement with the words of the prophecy. He shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. At about the same time, that is, in the last years of Herod's life, tidings out of the north also came to trouble that self-tormenting monarch. For Antipater, his oldest son, a despicable character, then at Rome, which had now become the center of what is indefinitely called in this prophecy the North, conspired to have letters written to his father, giving information that two other of his sons, whom he purposed to make his successors, had calumniated their father to Caesar. This caused Herod again to break forth with intense fury against his own sons and their supposed arbiters, as related by Josephus at great length. In regard to these extraordinary events, Falkenhausen quotes a passage which we give below from their Universal Ancient History, saying he does so the more readily because the authors of the passage had no thought at all of recording a fulfillment of prophecy. They say, the reader may remember that we left Herod in the most distracted state that can well be imagined, his conscience stung with the most lively grief for the murder of his beloved and virtuous Marian and of her two worthy sons, his life and crown in imminent danger from their rebellious Antipater and ungrateful Pheroras, his reign stained with rivers of innocent blood, his latter days embittered by the treacherous intrigues of a sister, his person and family hated by the whole Jewish nation, and last of all, his crown and all his glories on the eve of being obscured by the birth of a miraculous child, who is proclaimed by heaven and earth to be the promised and long-expected Messiah and Saviour of the world. To all these plagues we must add some fresh intelligences which came tumbling in upon that wretched monarch, and which, by assuring him still more, not only of the treasonable designs of the unnatural Antipater, but also of the bitter complaints which his other two sons, then at the Roman court, vented against them both, rendered him more than ever completely miserable. Herod's great fury to use the words of their prophecy, was not confined to the babes of Bethlehem and to members of his own family. For, says Josephus, it was also during paroxysms of fury that, nearly about the same time, he burnt alive Matthias and 40 young men with him, who had pulled down the golden image of the Roman eagle which he had placed over the gate of the temple. Furthermore, Josephus relates the following characteristic action of Herod. He came again to Jericho, where he became so choleric that it brought him to do all things like a madman, and though he was near death, yet he contrived the following wicked designs. He commanded that all the principal men of the entire Jewish nation be called to him. Accordingly, there were a great number that came, because death was the penalty of such that should despise the epistles that were sent to call them. And now the king was in a wild rage against them all. And when they were come, he ordered them all to be shut up in the hippodrome, and sent for his sister Salome and her husband Alexis, and spake thus to them, I shall die in a little time, so great are my pains. But what principally troubles me is this, that I shall die without being lamented and without such a mourning as men usually expect at a king's death. Therefore, in order to ensure that the nation should be plunged into mourning, he left an order that immediately upon his own death, all those leaders of the Jews whom he had confined in the hippodrome should be slain. That order, however, was not carried out. Daniel 11:45. And he will plant his palatial tents between the grand sea and the holy mountain of decoration, and he will have to come all the way to his end, and there will be no helper for him. Thou the priest, his palace and his end. We have already pointed out that Herod placed his royal dwelling places in the glorious holy mountain, he having 2 palaces in Jerusalem, one in the temple area and the other in the upper city. So they were between the seas, that is, the Mediterranean and the Dead Seas. The last word of the prophecy concerning him is, Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. As to this, we cannot do better than to quote Falkenhausen's comment. This part of the prediction obviously implied that in his last hours, the king would apply for deliverance or remedy from some affliction or disease, but would receive none. And how literally was this fulfilled in the end of Herod the Great? History has preserved to us few such circumstantial accounts of the last days of remarkable men as that which Josephus has transmitted to us of his, but we deem it too long for insertion here. It exhibits the most fearful picture to be found anywhere of the end of an impenitent sinner who, having cast out of his heart all fear of God and all feeling of responsibility to him, had equally lost all sense of duty to man, and after committing innumerable crimes and cruelties, in which he spared not those connected with him by the dearest and tenderest ties, any more than others, was at last seized in his old age with a painful and loathsome disease, and suffering alike from that and from the pangs of guilty fear, yet continued in a course of extreme wickedness to his last hour, seeking no remedy for his evil passions, but exhausting all the resources of the physician's skill to mitigate his bodily distemper and lengthen out his wretched life. We refer to Josephus for an account of the remedies and expedients to which he had recourse by the advice of his physicians, all of which failed to relieve or arrest the disease which cut him off while he was meditating new crimes of matchless cruelty. Thus he came to his end, and none helped him. He died a prey to horrible diseases and to horrible remorse, just 5 days after he had ordered the execution of his oldest son. We have deemed the matter of sufficient importance to give to the explanation of this part of the chapter, Daniel 11:36-45, a minute and detailed examination, for we are convinced that the theory of a break after verse 34 or 35 involving the transference bodily of all the rest of the prophecy, including the part contained in chapter 12, to a future day, deranges all that part of the prophetic word which it is important for us to understand at the present time. Conversely, our belief is that with this important passage correctly settled, other things which have been involved in the general obscurity occasioned by the break theory will be cleared up. Indeed, we shall not have to go very far to find practical proof of this. And now that we have reviewed the evidences which point to Herod the Great as their king foretold in this passage, our wonder is that any careful students of prophecy could have missed so plain a mark. For the passage foretells that at a definite point in Jewish history, namely just at the close of the Hasmonean era, there should arise what had not been in Israel for nearly 500 years, a king, and the character and doings of this king, which are of a most unusual sort, are predicted in strong and clear words. In perfect agreement with this, as fully recorded in the Bible and in profane history, is the fact that precisely at the point indicated, there did arise one who became king over Daniel's people, which king had precisely the character and did precisely the things which the prophecy had foretold of him. Conclusion. Daniel chapter 12 was completely fulfilled in the first century with no greater future fulfillment. That is because Jesus said that the tribulation that occurred upon Jerusalem had not happened before and would not occur again. He also said that the Hebrew generation that he was speaking to would not pass away until all the things he prophesied occurred. That wicked generation would only be given the irrefutable sign of Jonah, that Jesus would be dead for 3 days and then be resurrected. That generation who witnessed that miracle passed away in the first century. Daniel 12:2, where the angel states that there will be a resurrection of the righteous and the unrighteous have caused many to believe chapter 12 must be in the future, as the resurrection or judgment day is future. This is a red herring. The angel was merely pointing out to Daniel the resurrection hope. This is borne out in the last verse of Daniel 12, when the angel repeats the assurance that Daniel would be resurrected at the end of the days after he dies.